He was a broken man. No family. No name worth remembering. Just a solitary rancher on a storm-soaked prairie with nothing left to lose. But on the night the sky cracked open and the rain swallowed everything. Two impossibly tall figures crawled out of the darkness and collapsed at his feet. And the single choice he made in that moment, in the mud, in the cold, with the thunder judging him from above, would change everything. Not just for them. For him. For an entire tribe. And for the very meaning of courage on the merciless American frontier. The night pressed down on the prairie like a wet, heavy blanket, thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth and distant lightning. Wind clawed through the skeletal fence posts, carrying the low moan of the land. The rancher stood at his gate, lantern in hand, its dim glow flickering against sheets of rain, boots sinking into mud with each step. Then he saw them. Two figures sprawled across the muddy path, their bodies enormous, drenched, and trembling. Even through the storm, he could make out the sharp angles of their faces, dark braids plastered to their skin, and raw strength hidden beneath exhaustion. They whispered a single word, "Help!" Lightning cracked overhead. The rancher's heart thumped, caught between instinct and fear. Apache blood was not something the law forgave a white man for sheltering. Yet to leave them here was a sentence written in storm and mud. He moved. His fingers gripped the rough fabric of their clothes, lifting the larger of the two as the lantern trembled in the wind. Her eyes fluttered open, dark, wide, carrying exhaustion and a wary spark of something unspoken. The second sister clutched her sibling's arm, eyes fierce and cautious, tracing his every breath. He carried them, dragging, lifting, struggling against mud and wind, until the threshold of his cabin loomed like salvation against the chaos of night. Inside, fire sputtered in the hearth, orange light dancing across wet walls, steam rising from soaked coats and hair. He set them down carefully, hands trembling not from fear but from moral reckoning. Outside, the storm roared its judgment. But here, within these four walls, he offered something rare, warmth, and a choice beyond survival. The larger sister whispered, almost lost beneath the wind, "Thank you." And the rancher, standing in the flickering glow, realized that no law, no frontier rule, no fear of consequence, could outweigh the human call to mercy. The night stretched on, each crack of thunder a drum of warning. Outside, the prairie waited, indifferent and endless. But inside, a fragile silence had settled, carrying the tremor of what was to come. The first light of dawn seeped reluctantly through the cabin walls, thin and gray. The sisters lay side by side, shivering, wrapped in blankets that smelled of smoke and old leather. The rancher moved quietly, boiling herbs and roots tucked in jars since his wife had passed years before. Steam and dried leaves mingled with the damp air, a small promise against the chaos outside. As he worked, memories surfaced unbidden. His wife's laughter, fading in the corners of the cabin. The betrayal of neighbors who whispered behind his back. The loneliness that had hardened him. He had built this place as a fortress against pain. Yet here, two strangers had forced their way inside, breaking through walls no man's hand could rebuild. They stirred, eyes opening fully, watching him with curiosity and suspicion tangled with gratitude. Their size was imposing, their gaze piercing, yet tempered by the realization that he had chosen their survival over his own safety. Each careful motion, washing a wound, preparing food, spoke a language older than words. It was respect. It was acknowledgement. Outside, the rain had ceased. Puddles reflected soft light, and footsteps approached silently, bending grass and leaving signs that someone had already been near the ranch. A subtle warning carried in tracks that vanished into the mist. The sisters exchanged a glance. The rancher understood in the silence that this night had been only the first ripple in a river of choices. A quiet moment before the inevitable collision of lives, loyalties, and the harsh codes of a land that demanded courage at every dawn. Gray light filtered through narrow windows, painting walls in cold, hesitant shades. Mist hung low over the ranch, curling around fence posts and skeletal trees. Memory pressed heavily against the rancher's chest, as if the night had unearthed every shadow he had tried to bury. He moved between hearth and table, tending to the sisters now seated on blankets. Their eyes followed him, wary yet curious, watching the rhythm of hands honed by years of solitude. He noticed details. The scar crossing one's knuckles, the way the other's breath hitched when he touched raw skin. Survival here was not just muscle or weapon. It was heart and endurance. He placed a steaming cup of tea before the larger sister. Her fingers hovered, then gripped it, and he saw the faintest flash of gratitude in her dark eyes. The storm had passed, but its residue lingered, in the walls, in the air thick with remembrance and responsibility. The sisters stirred, faces pale in dim light. They spoke little, words clipped and careful, but each glance was a conversation. The larger sister finally spoke, voice low, measured, carrying both wariness and defiance. They had been chased, hunted by forces unknown, their lives a thread in a web of dangers he could not yet untangle. He fed them in silence, setting bowls of stew on the table, the scent heavy with warmth and smoke. And as he moved, he felt the invisible weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a burden not chosen lightly, yet accepted without hesitation. Outside, the prairie shimmered with pale dawn light. The rancher sensed the calm was temporary. The storm outside had been only a prelude to the turbulence yet to come. But inside, the fragile warmth of human connection had been rekindled, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a breath untainted by fear. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending sparks into the low rafters. Shadows stretched restless across the walls. The sisters had awakened fully, their immense forms surveying the small cluttered space. Their eyes followed every movement, the careful stacking of wood, the methodical stirring of water, the quiet precision of a life lived in solitude. The larger sister finally sat upright, gaze fixed on him with the patience of a hunter. When she whispered her question, why had he saved them, why had he risked everything, the rancher answered not with words but with motion. Hands steady, eyes calm, presence unwavering. He had acted because mercy demanded it, because life pressing against darkness required defiance. Footsteps outside disturbed the silence briefly, soft, careful, bending grass in subtle arcs. The rancher froze, sensing intrusion before it became visible. The sisters shifted, muscles coiled like springs. Yet no one came to the door. Whatever had passed left only a message in broken grass. The frontier was watching, and dangers unseen were already moving through the shadows. The firelight flickered across the sisters' faces, illuminating raw strength etched into their features. Slowly, wariness gave way to cautious understanding. The larger sister reached out, hesitated, then touched the rancher's forearm lightly, a wordless acknowledgement. He had chosen to honor life when fear might have dictated otherwise. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and mute. But inside, a silent covenant had been formed. They would face whatever came next together, not as strangers, but as allies bound by circumstance, courage, and a moral code that would guide them through the trials to come. Moonlight fell like silver dust across the prairie, casting long shadows from fence posts and skeletal trees. Inside the cabin, the sisters leaned against the wall, eyes sharp and unblinking. They had regained strength, and they spoke at last, words cautious, deliberate, carrying the weight of an entire tribe's fear. "The warriors believe we were taken," the larger sister said, voice low. The smaller one nodded, eyes fixed on the rancher, measuring his heart. The implication hung heavy. Danger was not distant. It was already coming. The rancher stood still, heart pounding. To let them go meant survival for him but death for them, or worse, a war that could spill across the plains like wildfire. To keep them meant risking his life, his freedom, and the fragile peace he had carved in solitude. Outside, coyotes called in the night, their cries curling like the laughter of fate mocking the living. Moonlight glinted on bent grass where footsteps had passed unseen, a warning whispered by the land itself. Yet within the cabin, quiet resolve solidified. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The larger sister spoke again, softer. "If you protect us, you will be marked. They will not forgive a white man who shelters their daughters." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. Yet clarity had emerged. He had chosen this path the instant he lifted them from the mud. Now he would see it through. The night deepened. The rancher moved methodically, securing doors, checking windows, mapping every approach. The sisters watched, tension coiled beneath their skin, ready. Outside, shadows of distant ridges seemed alive, whispering of warriors moving through the mist. He would protect them. He would defy the law, the whispers of townsfolk, the fury of warriors. He would do what was right, even if the world outside burned for it. The afternoon sun poured across the prairie, turning every blade of grass to gold. Inside the cabin, The larger sister spoke first, her voice steady yet laced with unease. "We are daughters of the chief." The words fell like stones into the quiet cabin. The rancher's hands paused mid-motion. The smaller sister continued, gaze fixed on the floor. "Our disappearance was not by chance. Someone within our own tribe orchestrated it. A betrayal meant to provoke war. Betrayal. He knew it well. He had felt its sting in his own life, and now it mirrored itself in the words of these strangers. The patterns were hauntingly familiar. Trust broken, deception hidden behind loyalty, the innocent caught in webs of ambition. As his fingers worked on her wound, he realized the trust forming here was fragile, forged through shared vulnerability, through choosing compassion over fear. The sisters unfolded their memories slowly, like delicate maps of a journey marked by danger and deceit. They spoke of hidden allies and hidden enemies, of whispers carried through campfires, of plots set to ignite conflict where none should exist. The smaller sister lifted her gaze to meet his. "Will you help us? Will you stand with us against what is coming?" Her voice carried the weight of generations, not a demand, only an invitation to choose morality over safety. He nodded. His choice had been made long before her words arrived. Protection, compassion, courage, these were not negotiable. Outside, the prairie trembled under the dying sun, acknowledging the storm that would soon descend. But inside, a plan had begun to form, and three souls bound by trust prepared to face whatever lay ahead. The midday sun beat mercilessly on the prairie, heat rising in waves that distorted the horizon. The rancher moved with deliberate purpose, reinforcing fences, tightening latches, burying small traps along the perimeter. Every action was preparation for the storm he knew was coming. The sisters stood nearby, scanning the horizon with eyes sharp as hawks, muscles taut beneath their skin. The rancher paused, noticing subtle shifts in the prairie. A broken branch, bent grass, then unmistakable. Arrows lying in the dirt, glinting in the sun. Scouts had already passed. Someone was testing the boundaries, sending warnings before the real attack. "They are close," the larger sister murmured, kneeling to trace the tracks. "Too close." The smaller sister joined her, and together they studied the signs of approach, silent communication passing between them as naturally as breath. By afternoon, the ranch had been fortified, positions mapped, traps set, the sisters moving through the fields with silent precision, running, leaping, testing their strength. Their towering forms cast long shadows, a living warning to anyone approaching with ill intent. The prairie itself seemed aware of the brewing conflict. Birds took flight in sudden bursts. A rattlesnake coiled in the distance, disturbed by invisible intruders. The circle of danger was tightening, invisible hands drawing ever closer, wrapping the ranch in a noose that could strangle without warning. They were a triad bound by trust and necessity, each aware of the fragile line between life and death. When the storm of men came, they would meet it head-on, with every ounce of strength and courage the frontier demanded. Dawn broke reluctantly over Red Mesa, painting the horizon in bruised purples and golds. The rancher stepped outside, earth cold and damp beneath his boots. Behind him, the sisters stood tall, towering figures bathed in fragile sun, faces unreadable yet resolute. Dust rose on distant ridges. The glint of steel and flash of wary eyes reflected the rising sun. Apache warriors had gathered, circling the ranch, their numbers hidden in undulating hills. Every whisper of wind carried intent, suspicion, challenge, impending judgment. The rancher's heart remained steady. He stood unarmed, yet his stance radiated the quiet force of conviction. He had saved life when the world demanded fear, and he would face consequence without flinching. The sisters flanked him, a silent wall of strength, every movement a pact of unity. The first warriors emerged from the shadows, cautious, eyes assessing the man who had dared harbor their chief's daughters. Tension stretched across the plains, taut as a bowstring ready to snap. Then a voice, venomous and sharp, tried to twist the narrative, painting the rancher as a kidnapper, an enemy of the tribe. The sisters stepped forward, immense and unyielding, their voices rising over the whispers of wind, asserting truth with a force that silenced doubt. Arrows whispered through the air, a warning and a test. Dust rose in small plumes. The traitor among the warriors attempted to manipulate the crowd, but truth cannot be bent without breaking. The sisters' testimony, fierce and precise, cut through the shadows of deception, revealing the betrayal that had orchestrated their disappearance. Faces hardened, Hearts weighed against honor. The warriors' circle shifted, confusion rippling like heat on the prairie. The rancher's calm steadied the moment, the fire of moral certainty radiating outward, challenging assumptions, forcing reconsideration. The tension fractured in a hush that rippled across the mesas. Truth had emerged, radiant and undeniable, and those who had sought confrontation now stood on the edge of acknowledgement. The dawn at Red Mesa bore witness to courage, loyalty, and the profound strength of truth standing firm against fear. The sunrise spilled soft gold across the prairie. Silence hung heavy, no longer tense, but reflective. The warriors had stepped back, weapons lowered, faces etched with confusion and respect. The chief himself arrived, riding through the soft light on a horse that gleamed like polished bronze. His eyes widened as they fell on his daughters. Alive, unharmed, standing beside a man he had never expected to trust. Recognition dawned slowly, a mix of awe, gratitude, and the weight of tribal expectation. The sisters moved forward to greet their father. The moment was tender, an unspoken reconciliation of fear and relief, of loyalty restored. The chief's hands trembled slightly as they rested on theirs, an acknowledgement of survival and the preservation of life over vengeance. The rancher watched quietly. Justice had been delivered, not through blood, but through courage, trust, and moral resolve. The prairie stretched into the morning haze, calm and almost reverent, as if acknowledging the resolution reached. Every face bore witness to the profound lesson etched into the land, that truth, courage, and mercy could overcome suspicion and deceit without the toll of needless blood. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant wildflowers, a reminder that even in a harsh land, renewal was possible when courage guided action. His choice had created more than survival. It had built a bridge between two worlds, a fragile alliance grounded in trust, honor, and the undeniable strength of doing what was right when no one else could. Evening settled softly over the ranch, the sky painting itself in muted oranges and deepening indigos. The air carried faint smoke, fresh earth, and the distant tang of wildflowers. Silence hummed with recovery and the quiet stirrings of trust that had taken root. The rancher moved through the yard, repairing gates, reinforcing fences, no longer just for survival, but as acts of care and renewal. The sisters worked beside him, their immense figures bending to tasks with surprising delicacy. Every shared glance conveyed meaning, gratitude, trust, respect. Night fell slowly, draping the prairie in deep blues and soft shadows. A fire burned low near the cabin, embers casting dancing shapes across the walls. The sisters shared stories of their youth, of laughter, fear, and resilience. The rancher listened, adding fragments of his own life in measured tones, weaving his story alongside theirs. Through these exchanges, a profound respect formed, a bridge between worlds once separated by misunderstanding and distance. The rancher's solitary life, once defined by isolation, now carried the rhythm of collaboration and the quiet affirmation that compassion could transform even the harshest landscapes. When the wind shifted, carrying whispers of distant wildlife and rustling grass, it echoed a subtle truth. Life had resumed, stronger for the trials endured. The prairie stretched endlessly beneath the setting sun, molten gold melting into violet shadows. A lone rider traced a slow path along the ridge, silhouetted against the fading light. Wind whispered across the grass, dust, sweat, and faint wildflowers, a reminder of the lives that had intertwined and the trials that had shaped them. The rancher paused, reins falling loose in his hands. He looked toward the cabin, where the sisters' forms were visible in the amber glow of lanterns, their laughter soft, their movements calm yet purposeful. He thought of every choice, every heartbeat in the long struggle to protect life when the frontier itself seemed poised to punish mercy. Every act of courage had carved a path across these plains, leaving traces that would outlast him. Night fell fully, stars piercing the dark canvas overhead, each one a distant witness to lives lived with courage, hearts tested by fire, and souls strengthened by choice. The prairie slept, yet it remembered. The blood not spilled, the bridges built between worlds, the quiet victories of compassion over fear. He rode slowly along the ridge, eyes fixed on the horizon where land met sky. He thought of the sisters, of their tribe, of the delicate alliances and moral truths tested and proven resilient. The wind carried a whisper, faint yet certain, as if the prairie itself spoke. Deeds done in silence, in courage, in steadfast morality, leave marks that outlast time and fear. And as he rode, shadows lengthening, stars brightening, he understood the final truth. The frontier had witnessed a single act of compassion that reshaped more than land. It reshaped the very heart of what it meant to be human. And in that quiet, immortal moment, the prairie held its breath, carrying one eternal truth. On land ruled by dust and blood, the only thing stronger than fear is the courage to do what's right when no one is watching.